Myself. Hi, Laura.
Hello, Lisa, and hello, everybody who's watching.
I'm excited to talk to you today about how to set up our calorie target in an easy way, especially because not everyone here might be wanting to use a formula or might be working with a coach. So I think it's going to be a great topic.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, this is a really big one because people, as you know, they ask, like, what do I do? So I'm ready to dive
Exactly.
in.
Awesome. Well, I think we should just simply start by why we even want to have a specific calorie target, or I mean, in essence, that is why it's so important to track or why it can be so helpful to track. And maybe you want to, yeah, voice your thoughts when it comes to that.
Yeah, so it is really important to see so this is where I like to start. I initiate the conversation with, do you know what you're consuming right now? Most people who have not had any experience tracking or even recognizing or paying attention to the macronutrients that they are regularly consuming. So I start there. It's, do you know what types of protein you're eating? Do you even pay attention to the way that your meals are combined? Because a lot of the times women, general population, they come to us and they say, I just want to lose weight. So then I say, well, what are you eating right now? Oh, I eat healthy. I don't I don't really want to know that at this point. It's how much are you consuming? So if we are
True.
consuming too many calories that our body is burning, we are going to maintain and build and hold on to that extra energy that we have in our body. So it is really important to recognize, what does our body need in order to elicit that change that we desire? And it does take some effort into what foods, yes, but also how much food are we consuming so that we can elicit that change. Does that round
Exactly.
things up?
No, yeah, 100%. And I think Elaine Norton does such a great job at this, at like referring it or kind of bringing up the metaphor of like finances, right? So if you want to save up some money, or if you have any kind of spending goal and you're thinking like, I actually don't know how much money is coming in and out every month. You need to track it. You need to have a look at like what is my income, what are my expenses, how much can I save realistically, how much can I put to the side? Am I perhaps in a negative balance where I'm accumulating more and more debt over time? And so the same can be said for weight, right? Like if you're not where you are in terms of your physique, or even if you are where you are and you're just simply curious, it's so important to know like what's coming in, what's going out, and that's the only way that we can really set a specific target when it comes to, hey, you should be saving up, or in this case you should be going into a calorie deficit of this size, or you actually have a surplus. You can treat yourself to something, to a nice holiday or whatever, like you're in a calorie surplus, you want to gain muscle, you're not eating enough, that type of thing. So I think referring it to that can sometimes be helpful for people to understand, like, why should I even be tracking calories, or why should I even be having a calorie target? And as I've alluded to in the introduction, there are several ways of like actually calculating what is my basal metabolic rate. So how much does my body actually need just at rest, depending on my height, my age, my weight, my sex. And then once you have calculated that, we can multiply that with an activity factor. So depending on your training frequency, your training intensity, how active are you in your day-to-day life, etc. So those are obviously a little bit more intricate ways to calculate. One of the favorite formulas that I have is called the Harris-Benedict formula. So I usually use that combined with one or two other calculations in order to determine the calories for my clients. But the important part is here that I also take into consideration what I see them log the days prior to us start, or when we start working together, because everyone who starts working with us and will start tracking their calories, or let's just say 95% of people. However, since this episode here is titled like how to determine your calorie target the easy way, we actually want to touch on two specific ways that you can do that without any formulas. So, or at least not with any intricate formulas. Nonetheless, the Harris Benedict formula is my favorite one if you do want to use a more specific formula. But yeah, Laura, maybe you want to start with the first way of like how we can determine our calorie target. Otherwise, I guess I should preface this by saying we should determine our goal before we even determine our calorie target. Because if you don't know, hey, I just want to maintain my weight, maybe recomping at maintenance if you're newer to strength training, or hey, I want to go into calorie surplus because I have been training for 8, 10 years, whatever. Um, and I'm not seeing the progress that I want, but I want to put on muscle, or you want to lose fat. So, set your target, your goal first, and then we can determine the calorie target.
Yeah, so I'm going to back up a little bit. As you mentioned, we typically ask our new clients, let's track for 1, 2, sometimes 3 weeks depending on the individual. Let's see where you are currently at. And then we use the scale as a metric to guide us in that direction. So if you're eating the same amount of calories for 2, 3 weeks and your weight is holding the same, okay, great. So that's we're going to estimate that that's about your maintenance calories at this point. So then we'll use that along with the Harris Benedict or the BMR, the BMR equation to kind of gauge where we go from there. So as you mentioned, let's say weight loss is the main goal in this sense. It's okay. So let's start with where you at. And typically, to be honest, where I start is okay. So let's hold those calories. Let's just shift things because more often than not, we're not eating enough protein, we're getting too many fats and not enough carbohydrates within that range. So let's just start with the same calories, but bumping up your protein and adjusting your carbohydrates and fats as is, and then see what your body does. And then that's the first stage. And then the second stage is okay, you want to decrease your body fat, let's decrease those calories by, let's go 10% because that's not a big jump. It's fairly reasonable. It's easy calculations, and then we can kind of go in that direction and see how your body responds. And then so I think that the important thing is to do the smallest changes that elicit the most change in your body.
That's a really great point, and absolutely the way that we like to go about it for sure, in the sense of let's find the minimal effective dose. Totally. But yeah, and I guess just to recap that method, essentially we want to be tracking calories, or not tracking calories, tracking our food intake for a few weeks. Um, then looking at the weekly average calorie intake. Alongside, you're going to be tracking your weight for a few weeks, let's say 2 to 4 weeks type of thing, and then determining your weekly average weight. If the weekly average weight stays more or less the same, give or take a couple of
Mhm.
pounds, or not pounds, grams, especially considering, cycle changes and so on. And if your calories are roughly the same, then that is my maintenance calories. I'm maintaining my weight at this amount of calories. So you can kind of lock that in, but use your common sense here as well. And I would actually suggest, at the same time, using a generic calorie calculator online as well. You can literally go to Google and type in, calorie calculator. I like Mind Pump, which is a good company. They put out some great information, and they have a great calorie calculator as well. Just so that like, am I roughly around about the number that this machine is estimating as well? Or am I way off? If you're way off, it could also be that you're not actually tracking that accurately, especially when people start off. We mentioned that in our last episode, that we're often not, we're missing foods, or we're using generic logs. So we might be missing several hundred calories. But so like, let's just say you're determining, oh, I'm at 1,200 calories and my weight is maintaining. Is this my maintenance calories, even though the calorie calculator is spitting out 2,200? Then thinking about, did I really log everything, is the first point. And the second point is also, it could also indicate that you might be in need of a reverse diet, that you might have been under eating. Like, then just be honest with yourself in terms of your hunger levels, in terms of, has your food quantity reduced over the course of the years? How is your hormone level looking like? Look at all of these things, but we don't really want to get too much into the intricacies of this. We really just wanted to give you that first method of like tracking your food intake, tracking your weight, taking the weekly average, not day to day trends. We know that that can be shifting a lot depending on fiber, on salt, on overall carbs, etc. And then comparing the two, and then from there, if you're confident with, hey, this is roughly my calorie maintenance, I'm going to drop down 10%, starting with that, monitoring your weight for a few weeks also. And then if your weight goes down, hey, that's a sufficient calorie deficit. Or you might want to increase that a little bit if nothing is happening, or maybe increasing activity in order to elicit that bigger calorie deficit. Did I kind of summarize that
Mm,
well?
yeah, no, that was good. Thank you for laying that out. We want to keep it as simple as possible so that people can kind of grasp these concepts. So that was great.
Exactly, yes. And then the second method we wanted to touch on, which is actually something I have learned from my first mentor, Cody McBroom from Tailored Coaching Method. And that is simply taking your goal body weight in pounds and multiplying that by 15 or 16 for a calorie maintenance level, or by 10 to 14. I know that's a big range, but still, I'm going to bear with me here. 10 to 14, somewhere within those ranges for a calorie deficit, or by 17 to 19 for a calorie surplus. So, just again, if you want to roughly know your calorie maintenance, is going to be somewhere about 15 to 16 times your goal body weight in pounds. So I don't have my calculator in my head, or my calculation is not working so well. But let's just say if your goal body weight is 150 pounds, and you're going to multiply that by 15. How much is that? 155. Bu- bu- bu-
Let's say like 1800 calories ish to oh
Right. Yes. Yeah. So, and then if you were to calculate for a calorie deficit, then taking those 150 pounds times 10, so you'd go into to 1500,
yeah.
and then for a surplus something like 17 to 19 times. So that is a super simple way to like give you a little bit of an indication. Again, you saw that there is a huge range, especially when it comes to the calorie deficit, and that is that some people are a little bit outside of that range, and obviously this calculation does not take into account body composition. So, for instance, if I were to go by this, I'm a bit outside of that because my maintenance is like on the higher range. I have a higher, muscle mass than, let's just say, the average Joe's sort of, who might be starting off with. And then likewise, if someone has a large dieting history in the sense of they have gone from diet to diet to diet, they might have to start, or might have to go all the way to the bottom of like those 10 times goal body weight, whereas I would probably see a reduction in body weight by just starting with that upper range. Does it make sense?
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna say the variance is so individualized. We know this is why it's so important to work with a coach. And as you mentioned, if someone has been dieting or under eating for a really long time and they want to lose weight, the best approach is to not start in a deficit because as you mentioned earlier, we have those hormones to factor in. So this is a very surface generalization. There are like you said, a lot of intricacies in how you and I might have a higher maintenance um, calorie allotment than than what if we were to use a calculator. That's why it's really valuable just to track where you are at and see how your body responds, and then go in that direction as you mentioned. And then using
Absolutely.
those really simple calculations can get you started. And then, like we mentioned earlier, it's kind of where can we make small shifts in order to see bigger changes? And those simple calculations can really get you started, even just to get you into the mindset of what tracking looks like and how you even track those calories accurately and consistently.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm such a big fan of like practicing maintenance, being in maintenance for longer. I did think that this episode, in the sense of like how to calculate your deficit or whatever calories easily, is important because so many people automatically just go right to 1200, or like
Yeah.
the mistake that I have seen so many people make is like, hey, they want to track, they're signing up for MyFitnessPal or whatever other app, and they type in their goals, and of course MyFitnessPal spits out a goal for you, but it's usually super aggressive. The amount of
Yeah.
times that I have seen a 200-pound heavy male just typing in, I want to lose weight, and obviously most people type in, I want to lose weight quickly, and then they get a calorie allotment of 1500 calories, which is incredibly steep, and because of that they're not able to adhere. So I would rather people use a little bit of common sense, even if course you and I know going in or being at maintenance for a while would already um be helpful for a lot of people and might even elicit some weight loss already. But with those simple equations, I still think that it might provide them with a bit of understanding, like, hey, I'm going to think about the numbers as well, not just take those 1200 and accept that that is a deficit, but instead, perhaps if next time my fitness pal or whatever tells you to eat 1200 calories, you're like, that seems way too low. My goal body weight is actually 150 pounds or so. I'm just gonna start with 1500 or 1600 instead of this. But yeah, you mentioned a very good point earlier, and that was protein. And even though we didn't necessarily title this episode like how to know your or set your macros, I do think just touching on that briefly is going to be helpful. So usually protein is the first macro that we set, and that's another thing that MyFitnessPal and the other calorie calculate or macro tracking apps usually do wrong. They give you a way too low protein percentage, and carbs are usually way too high in the auto setting. And most people don't know that they should be changing that. So then they start tracking, and then they see, oh, you reached your protein target, which is super, super low. So they're not going to bother going out of their way to exceed that because they think I've already reached my target. So setting or changing your protein target in whichever tracking app you're using has to be the next step after setting or determining your calorie target. And so yeah, maybe you want to touch on like where we usually set our protein.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad that you said that. And because the adherence plays a major role as well. If they give you these calories and you stick with it for a couple weeks and then you go off track, then there was really no benefit into decreasing
Exactly.
your calories so much. So in order in your question, how we usually set protein at 1 gram per pound of body weight. So if you're 150, let's put that target to 150. Now, there is a caveat. If you've been tracking for 2 to 4 weeks and you recognize you're getting 60 grams of protein per day, okay, so let's ease into that because we could have digestive issues along with, I mean, that just feels overwhelming. So that's why it's really helpful to track beforehand. But we do typically like to lean between zero point 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of lean mass. So I guess I should have prefaced that was okay. So you want to be 150 pounds. You're currently 200 pounds. Let's aim for that 150 grams of protein per day based on that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great that you differentiated there, because yeah, a lot of the even just if we Google it or whatever, it says 1 gram per pound. And for most people, I would say 1 gram per goal body weight. That's a great place to aim for. Like, because even with lean mass, most people don't know their lean mass. To be honest, I don't know my lean mass, have no
Me
clue.
neither.
So, I would just say go by your goal body weight. If you go with 1 gram per pound, you're definitely erring on the side of caution. You can get away with a little bit less with zero point 0.8, especially if you're struggling to even get close to that. As you mentioned, inch your way up slowly, maybe from week to week, increase by 10 grams if you're starting way, way, way lower. But yeah, once we have set the protein target, the next target that we want to set is the fat target. And I mean, again, we say this all the time, so person dependent. However, there are several things to take into consideration. First one being personal preference, of course. Are you someone who really enjoys eating fatty foods, generally speaking, much more than you do carbs? And you're like, well, I can get away with a little bit of potatoes at night, but even for my breakfast, I just prefer eggs and bacon, and for my lunch, I prefer this and this. Cool. Okay, we're definitely going to set a higher fat target. Whereas if you're someone, I'm, super active, I do a lot of explosive things and intense things. I love carbs. I crave them. We're going to keep fats more to the minimum, especially also if you're trying to gain muscle. And so therefore, the minimum we want to set that minimum, and still in order to make sure you're maintaining hormonal health. And the minimum, in my opinion, can sometimes easily be determined by going a third of your goal body weight. So just multiplying your goal body weight, let's just say it's 120 is your goal body weight. A third of that would be 40 grams. that would be the absolute minimum I would set it at. Some people also go off of a percentage of your total calories. I'm just a bit more cautious with that because um, calories might be really low. Like if you're in a deficit and then you might be setting fats too low after all. So I would just say rather base it off of your goal body weight, and in order to make sure that we are keeping them at the minimum for hormonal health, so that we're supporting your body as best as we can throughout the weight loss or even in a surplus.
I'm glad that you said that. One thing that I want to magnify is that you have the choice, right? Like we give you this structure, we give you the blueprint. However, we want to be able to work with your dietary needs. You know,
Mm,
both you and I, we don't feel satiated with higher fat. So we need those carbohydrates. And someone else might be, like you mentioned, I like those higher fats. So that's where we would definitely veer you towards. Let's just stay within this target boundary, these targets, so that you can see how your body responds. So I'm really glad that you said that because it's not one size fits all. It's really navigating how each individual feels with those certain macronutrients.
absolutely. Yeah, and then
Okay.
obviously the rest of the calories are going to be filled up with the carbs. So for most people in general, what I have seen when they start tracking, it is a matter of limiting fats and carbs, and most people are struggling reaching their protein target. And so what I often find helpful is just making little swaps, like going from those fattier cuts of meat to the leaner ones, or even switching from full fat dairy items to lower fat items. But more than anything, also moderating the oils used in cooking and sauces and dressing. Those tend to be the bigger offenders. And we've spoken about this before, but still, I think this has to be said over and over and over again because I see it over and over and over again. And like you said, people say, I eat healthy, but then they drown their salad in half a cup of olive oil and sprinkle it with nuts and with avocado, like a whole avocado and whatever. And so that adds up in calories a lot. But yeah, simple swaps can go a long way. Or if you have 3 eggs for your breakfast, maybe you want to swap to one whole egg and egg whites with that. When it comes to carbs, I often find that once we shift more towards whole food carb items, people automatically reduce their carb intake very easily. So let's just say if you go away from consuming a lot of bread or a lot of like just sugary things and so on, and you shift that more towards potatoes and even rice and fruit and vegetables, automatically you're in somewhat of a healthy range. Of course, that doesn't mean you're necessarily in a calorie deficit carb range automatically, but still it's often a first step.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's where we generally start with our Gen Pop new clients. It's let's identify those carb sources. Okay, even if you like you mentioned like the pasta, for example, I like to start with okay, so let's have half the amount of pasta you
Mm,
normally would, and let's put in some riced cauliflower or something. So it's not restricting per se. It's really identifying how we can make those dietary requirements or your the nutritious foods that you enjoy, and let's incorporate them so that you can still enjoy them while still hitting your targets.
exactly. Yeah, I often refer to that as kind of like macro Tetris because you
Yeah.
sort of like play around and tweak, and but you definitely don't want to demonize anything or think of anything as like completely off limit. So I guess just to summarize the second method that we had there, or the two methods that we had there, the first one was tracking your current food intake, tracking your weight at the same time, looking at the weekly averages and seeing if both roughly stay the same, then you're at maintenance. And from there, if you want to elicit a calorie deficit, dropping it by 10%, going into surplus would be increasing by 10% perhaps, or sometimes even 5% might be sufficient. And the second method was for a calorie deficit, multiplying your goal body weight by 10 to 14 roughly. For deficit for maintenance, it was 15 to 16 times your goal body weight. For surplus, 17 to 19 times your body weight, roughly speaking. But with that point, I also just wanted to briefly touch on periodization, and I do think that that's a whole topic for another episode where we should be talking about periodization, why that is so important. But just in general, if you move in and out, like into a deficit, it's so important to set yourself up with a plan for when you're going to come out of that, how long you're going to stay in that there, how you're going to come out of it. So through a reverse diet, and then also, especially if you have the goal of building muscle mass, particularly a specific body part, like it was the case, or still is the case for me in terms of glute development and so on. Um, it is essential that we spend enough time at least in at maintenance calories, or ideally for someone like me who has been strength training for a long time, at least a small calorie surplus. So I love, for a long-term setup, I really, really love the idea of a periodization of, okay, you're not feeling super comfortable right now, you do feel like you have some extra body fat to lose, let's go into a deficit for about 12, maybe 16 weeks, if you have a little bit more to lose. Then okay, there's an end to this, so it might be easier to adhere as well. Then you're going to move out of that into a maintenance phase for maybe 3, 4 months or so, maybe over the summer. So like cutting in spring or before spring, setting yourself up for summer where you're maintaining, because you don't really always want to be in a cut over summer. You're going on vacation, you have more social outings, that type of thing. And then in winter, when we're all a little bit more bundled up anyway, and where it might not matter so much to you how lean you are, you also have the holidays and so on, going into a nice building phase for about 5 or 6 months and repeating that year and year and year and year, you can build an amazing physique and feeling great in your body most of the time. Maybe towards that last month or two of the building phase, you might feel a little bit uncomfortable and like almost excited to cut, but that's so much better than constantly being like, oh, I'm trying to lose weight, and then you're kind of messing up because you're going vacation and you're going back into it, and then you're feeling uncomfortable and blah blah blah, and you're just repeating that cycle and never daring to see what a surplus even feels like. And I'll be the first one to say that I was terrified of it as well. And actually just going into a small surplus, I shared that with Laura as well, that I really had to inch my way up, in terms of baby steps. And to some people that might sound ridiculous, but I increased my calories by like 50 calories the first couple of weeks, because I was afraid I was gonna gain fat, and I was like, oh, actually I'm just feeling more energized, and I'm sleeping a little bit better. Okay, cool, maybe I can lift that a little bit more. And so I just building my confidence in that. And then also when you get to a point where you're uncomfortable sort of sitting with that for a while, and then only when hey, okay, now it really is the time to lean out a little bit for summer or whatever, dropping them back down to your maintenance or even into a small deficit. I do think that for a lot of people that could work really well, and maybe that is encouraging, just to hear that it's okay to go through the different phases throughout the year.
Yeah, that's definitely the most challenging part. So thank you for sharing that. And something that you touched on is, and one thing that that I noticed might be helpful to mention is you're kind of aiming for those calories on a day to day basis, right?
Hmm.
So you set your calories, you're in a deficit, you're at maintenance, you're in a surplus. General, generally, you aim to hit those calories on a day to day basis. However, if you recognize that you're not adhering to that, you're going over on the weekends. You have to factor that into your lifestyle. There are ways to do that. So just briefly touching on what you mentioned with, if you have your, say you're in maintenance calories and you know that you're going over on the weekend. So maybe you can decrease those calories throughout the week by say 10%, and then whatever you have decreased over the week, you put that in on the weekend, because adherence is number one. If you're not going to stick with anything, it may not work in your favor. So
Hmm.
let's work with you. And when you identify that, especially if you're in a deficit, you recognize, I'm really structured during the week. And this is not to say that you can just go off the rails on the weekend and just eat whatever. That is not going to help you at all. What I'm mentioning is, let's increase some of those carbohydrates on the weekend so you have a little bit more flexibility. If that's what's happening naturally anyway, you have to work with your lifestyle, your body. So I just kind of wanted to throw that in because we see that very often. It's like, I'm so regimented during the week and then I fall off on the weekend. Okay, so let's restructure things so that is more conducive to your lifestyle.
I love that. Yeah, and as you said, adherence always has to come first. So we should definitely have another episode on like
Mhm.
refeeds and just in
Yeah.
general how we can use that differently as well. But so many great things to talk about. And thank you so much for just contributing with your input on this. I hope people found it helpful as well. If anyone has any comments or question in terms of how to set your calorie target or just in general what we spoke about, I'd love to hear about it in the comments, or you can contact us on Instagram or website as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you, Laura, for your time.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everybody.
Speak to you next week. Bye.
See you.